You're listening to Messy Jesus Business, a podcast about radical gospel living. Hi everyone, I'm Sister Julia Walsh, a writer, spiritual director, and jail minister living in Chicago. Welcome to The Mess. At Messy Jesus Business, we explore how the mess of radical gospel living brings disciples into a life of struggle as we advocate for social justice, live simply, serve others, practice contemplation, and live in community. Now, on to our guest. Kaya Oakes is the author of 4 books, including The Nuns Are All Right and Radical Reinvention. Her 5th book, The Defiant Middle, How Women Claim Life's In-Betweens to Remake the World, is forthcoming from Broadleaf Books in November 2021. Her work has been printed in numerous national publications, and she is a sought-after public speaker. She was one of a select number of international journalists who traveled to Rome and the Vatican in 2016 to study writing on religion in politically turbulent times. She is a faculty member in the college writing programs at UC Berkeley, where she teaches creative nonfiction, composition, and research writing, and she is a trained spiritual director. In this episode of Messy Jesus Business, Kaya Oakes tells us what it means to her to be a layperson in the Catholic Church. We talk about the humility required when teaching, writing, and listening, and offering one's prophetic voice. We discuss Oakes' journey into religion writing and being a spiritual director, and how living a life of faith and work requires keeping one's ego in check. And we talk about the mess of loneliness that comes with her being a Catholic in Oakland, California, the most secular region of the country. Enjoy! Hi, Kaya. Welcome to Messy Jesus Business.
It's nice to see you and hear you today, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad you made time for this because I know you have a lot going on all the time, a full teaching schedule and a full writing schedule. I feel like I've known you forever, but I realize it's probably only been a few years if I really think back. And I came to know you initially, I think because I read something you wrote in America magazine about being a godmother. And then that sort of led me on this little journey of exploring your writing and your work, and loved your memoir, Radical Reinvention, really connected with your story. And then I was surprised to learn that you came from a background of writing about music, and your first book was called Slanted and Enchanted, right?
Slanted and Enchanted. Yes, it came out in 2008, I think.
Okay. 2008. Okay, so it came out a while ago. But really you started off your writing career writing about indie culture and music. And here you are now really writing about mystics and saints and religion and spirituality and all these other mysteries. So was that surprising for you?
Yes. Just because, it's a long and winding road. And I think it was just in a lot of ways, it was a natural transition because I was always somebody who's very interested in the part of creativity that has to do with questions about where does art come from and inspiration, and how do people decide, how do you look at I know you're in Chicago, and I love the Art Institute. I love the Chagall windows there. And like, how does Chagall decide to do something like that unless it was a commission? How do artists, how does a musician decide to write a song? Where does that come from? What is the mystery of creativity as part of creation in a larger sense? And my interest in spirituality and religion sort of dovetailed with that, in the sense that I found a lot of the same questions are what motivate theology and the study of, and in a larger sense, beyond theology, the kind of what I think is the vocation of the layperson in our church and in the church is the smaller C, Catholic, meaning universal. The vocation of the layperson is to sort of like figure these things out on our own with the guidance of the tradition.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we've talked about that before, and it's a shared passion of mine, the way creativity and spirituality really go together.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I uh, find it fascinating that you brought up the vocation of the layperson is about figuring this out. So what is the vocation?
I think that's the question that I'm always trying to answer when people say, are you a Catholic writer? Are you part of the Catholic literary tradition? And you and I have also talked about this, which is, what is that? Who owns it? Why does somebody feel that some people are on that list and some people aren't? And so I've always put writer first, and that's my job, is to teach writing. And then religion is part of, it's like that idea of an intersectional identity that feminists talk about, how our class, race, gender identity, jobs that we do, all those things intersect to create forms of oppression, but religion is often left out of that conversation. So the vocation of the layperson becomes, how are we responsible, because the church cannot give us everything that we need, then we are sort of on our own a lot of the time. I don't mean we're abandoned, but just that,
Mhm.
we don't work for, I don't work for the church. I don't teach the Catholic school. I write for America, which is a Jesuit magazine, but I also write for secular magazines. You see what I mean? So it's sort of that
Mhm.
question of like, the vocation of the layperson is sort of like to take the stories of the church out into the rest of the world, and see what does it mean to be Catholic in spaces that aren't Catholic.
Mhm.
So what does it mean for me to be Catholic at UC Berkeley, or what does it mean for anybody to be Catholic in activist spaces, which, as you know, are often
Mhm.
very secular, right?
Mhm.
Increasingly secular. So that's what I mean. And then there's a whole other side to this that has to do with feminism, which I won't go into right now. But
You
I'm
can.
sure you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, it's this question of like, in a church where women don't lead, how do we lead one another? And
Mhm.
how do we? I think the better word there is, I think women in the church tend to accompany one another rather than think about, I'm a leader and you're following me, rather
Mhm.
that we're journeying together.
Mhm.
And so again, lay people have to sort of think about our responsibility to one another in that way.
Yeah, yeah. As you say all that, it makes me think so much about, like, that's why I'm a sister. Like, that's why being a Catholic sister, Franciscan, really works for me, because it is about that communal, that camaraderie, the accountability that is just naturally put in place because we're sharing life, we're sharing the call, the mission. Thinking about lay people in the church is really interesting for me too, because I think as a Catholic sister, I recognize I'm sort of in this gray area in between, where some people don't see us as sisters, as lay people, but yet we are. Right, and yet we are obviously really tied by our identity to the institutional church, and our profession like makes it clear that we are Catholic Church women. So it's a different, yeah.
Mhm.
Do you think as a married laywoman, though, you're able to sort of float along those boundaries, and like, do you have a different type of freedom? Are there different bridges that you get to explore?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a lot more freedom in a lot of ways. So, for example, with writers who do work at Catholic schools, um, or who only publish with Catholic publishers, there, as you know, as we've seen, there's a lot of lines that you can't cross, and that can be very dangerous. if you do cross them in terms of employment. and
Mhm.
and so I have a lot more. I was on a retreat 8, 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I was just starting to wrestle with these questions about what was it going to mean to write about religion as this very private thing that I was going to become very public about. And the Jesuit I was he just died of COVID, actually, which is really
Mm.
sad. The Jesuit who was directing the retreat said, think about the freedom you have to say things other people can't say as a gift, and also that you're taking a vow to the church to stand up and say, to speak, to talk back to the church when it does things wrong, because you take a vow as to the church when you get confirmed, and like I did that later in life. But then you're also like saying, I'm going to speak on behalf of people in the church who can't say these things. In other words,
Mm.
right, like, so when somebody in the church feels certain ways and they can't write about it because they might lose their job or something, then I can. And so
Mhm.
that's a real responsibility that I take very seriously, in the sense of it's important work. And then, I'm married to somebody who's not Catholic, and that also gives me a very different perspective and a very different position, because we are not, the kind of like cookie cutter Catholic family with the particular number of,
Right.
between 2 and 10 children, and
Right.
the minivan. Like,
Yeah, right.
it's just not who we are. And
Yeah.
I think that's important, because people
Mm.
need to know that there are many kinds of relationship in the church, like
Mm.
personal relationships that don't fit into the boxes of what other people might think is right or good.
Mm. I'm hearing a lot about authenticity and like the freedom of showing up and being like say uh the freedom of showing up and in your authentic self, right? And claiming your identity and being grounded in who you truly are, and how that gives you a freedom to offer a prophetic voice in a different sort of way than a person who's trying to conform or like meet the expectations or follow the rules may have. So do you understand your role as like being offering a prophetic voice in the church?
Julia, the first time somebody said that to me, I was so uncomfortable, and I was like, shut up.
Yeah, that's
like,
a good sign.
like I was like, what happens to prophets is that they get thrown down the well, and they're at
Right.
the bottom of the well going, you really better listen to me. Like, I'm at the bottom of this well. Like, it just, my spiritual director often says that to me. He says, and he's a Franciscan too. So of course I take him very seriously. So like, he often says that, he says, I see you as a Jeremiah. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, so I'm going to get thrown down to the bottom of the well. Thanks. But like, it's also like Jeremiah is the one who says that, God seduced him and he let himself be seduced, or in one translation,
Or duped, right? Yeah.
or duped, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's true. Like, I let God into my life, and I was like, in some ways I felt tricked or surprised, but if prophecy is calling people to understand when something is unjust, and using your gifts to point that out and to try to write that, then yeah, that's the job of journalism, right?
Right.
so
Every journalist is actually a prophet in the
well,
modern
the,
world.
the good ones,
The
yeah.
good ones, okay. It's probably important that we clarify. Right, the ones
Right.
who have the common good, justice, care for the poor, the little ones, all in their mind and their vision of what the truth they're telling.
Which
Yeah.
quite a lot of them do. And it always strikes me that the justice work in the church during the abuse crisis, has been done by journalists, right? And then a lot of them were Catholic or lapsed Catholic, and they felt this desire to call the church to accountability. And they brought about a lot of that change. And I think that is really important for people to pay attention to, even now. Just why is it that people who are marginalized or out or othered by the church are often the ones who call it to accountability?
Yeah, yeah. And there's something about humility too that I think is required of those that are willing to speak the truth for the sake of others, right? Yeah. What is your work of teaching and spiritual direction, which you like I've are your other job? You do so many things. Like you're not just a writer. But anyway, in those other ministries of spiritual direction and teaching, what have you learned about the importance of being with the truth?
That's a good way of putting it. I think anybody who teaches knows about that. The truth of teaching is that humility of knowing that every day you're going to make a mistake or just embarrass yourself, and that your students are going to call you out on it. When you're lucky, sometimes they are afraid of you, which is something that as I get older, I see my students more intimidated by me than when I was like a young pup, of 27. And I looked younger than I was, and I started teaching, and my students just, were calling me out all the time, just like, you messed that up, you did that wrong, blah, blah, blah. And in spiritual direction, it's again guiding people to recognize experiences of that they may not have recognized at the time, or guiding them to understand encounters with grace, the divine, higher power, whatever you call it. And in both of those cases, it's about calling yourself out too and saying, like, am I doing this? Like, do I teach because my ego likes it and I like being the boss? Or do I teach because I actually care about empowering students to help them find their own agency at a school? My school has like 40,000 students. They can get very lost. And then beyond graduation, can they use writing to empower themselves and find their own agency? Do I do spiritual direction because, again, it feeds my ego in the sense that somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, I want to work with you, because I only do it very, very, very part-time. And somebody has to find me, find my website, like dig me up. That's my ego part. But then is that the truth part is like, I'm doing it because I felt called to it for a long time because it had helped me so much, right? And so how can I turn that around?
Mm, mm. What does it mean to be called for you?
When I think about vocation, I always think about the word. I'm a word nerd, right? And it's vocare. That's the Latin root, which means to be called, but it also means calling. So like calling others. So your vocation is both what you feel called to do, in the sense that not that you even enjoy it necessarily, but that you can't picture yourself doing something else, or you've tried other things and they were miserable, and this is less miserable. But that it involves calling others. And when you are leaning into and growing into your vocation as a human being, other people are attracted to what you do. In our circles of kind of religion and literature and activism and stuff, can often manifest in somebody who's thought of again as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
but more often tends to be somebody who is, if they are a leader in some, they tend to be the kind of leader who is always playing down their leadership, and in the sense that they're trying not to be seen as a leader, if that makes sense. I think a lot about William Barber, and how I saw him speak here a couple years ago, and he is obviously incredibly charismatic, obviously a great preacher, a great activist leader, but he doesn't talk about himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's never I, it's we, us. And he is playing down his leadership, and that organization really pushes this horizontal model of leadership. And I know sisters do that very well also. Yeah, so that vocation, it's like it has to be reciprocal. Like it's like I'm called to do something, but also like other people see me doing it, and they feel like they want to get involved too, or just they just, I admire people who are doing things I would never do. My sister's a doctor, and like I think that's incredible. Would I ever want to be in medicine? No way. Just like no way. But like she's so natural at it, and I think that's vocation.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard you say in the past that you really see your vocation as both writer and teacher. It's not one nor more than the other. So how do they complement each other?
Because if I only wrote, and I've thought about this a lot lately because of the pandemic, has forced us to make so many choices about, and forced us to give up choices in a lot of ways. And I've been working on this book, and so I've really just been doing this one thing. And I thought to myself, if all I had done last year was write that book, I would have been so miserable. I need to have another job other than just writing, and I think that's healthy. I think that you need, when you're a writer, to turn outward, and that doesn't just mean sharing your writing with people. I mean, that's great, but having a job, whether that's working at Trader Joe's or teaching or being a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it is, being a janitor, it doesn't matter. But what it does is it gives you this opportunity to kind of like, again, your ego sort of has to be put in check and say like, I feel when I'm writing that I'm very much in this little tiny space, and the pandemic has exacerbated that. And if I hadn't had the opportunity to check in with my students, to be in communication with them, to be talking about someone else's writing, it would have been a horrible year. I mean, it was a bad enough year anyway, right? So like, 2020 was not an easy year. So thank God that I had these people, they're not young adults, they're adults who are young, who I could say to, like, how's your writing? What are you doing? What are you thinking about? How do you like this book? What's your life like? And that kept me in check of just spiraling down into my own ego.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you're saying there has a lot to do with like the universal human experience and just the spiritual life in general, of like this invitation to balance of both the inner and the outer. Like we have to be really in touch with what's going on in ourselves and tending to that self-care in our hearts and our minds and our feelings and our thoughts, and not let any of that take over. And at the same time, we need to have our gaze outward, right? To the community, to Christ, to the world and the needs of all. So yeah, so that's a beautiful mirroring when you put it that way. One of the books you wrote is on the nuns, NONESs. I wonder what you think might be most misunderstood by those of us who are very inside the church about those people who identify as having no religion, none.
So my number one problem with a lot of people in the church who are evangelists is that they see the nuns as potential Catholics, right? Potential future Catholics. But we know from all the data, all the statistics, that they are not likely to convert, right? They are people who are, for whatever reason, they're very unlikely to be adult converts. And also there are not a lot of adult converts to Catholicism, let's face it. And so What I think the approach instead is, instead of saying to somebody like, "Hey, can I introduce you to this guy called Jesus Christ?" and like, and like thinking about it that way, is instead to say, "What do you actually believe
Mm,
about religion, God, and what is your spiritual life like as a person who doesn't believe these things?"
mm-hmm,
So that's the approach I took to writing my book, was to meet people sort of where they were, and say, rather than like, if I were to give you a Bible, how, what would you come back and tell me 6 weeks later? That's not it. It's to say, what is your spiritual life like? What are your encounters with the divine like? Why don't you want to be part of an institutional religion? What do you think institutional religion is? And oftentimes their understanding of it has very little to do with the church, what the church actually teaches. So with Catholics, for example, people tend to think all Catholics are just, right wing people who are obsessed with abortion. That's it. That's all, because that's the platform of. And so that sort of like, the problem is that a lot of nuns are, they either don't know a lot about religion because they grew up non-religious, or they had very toxic, bad experiences of religion, often with fundamentalist versions of religion. So either fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, or like very, very orthodox, strict Catholic kind of homeschooling, family backgrounds, or Orthodox Judaism, or like strict Islam, or something where there was a lot of, rules to follow, and they were very bound by that. And also, nuns don't tend to be people who find it very suspicious and confusing that there's a lot of ties between religion and politics, that they would prefer that this church and state remain separate. So people in the church tend to think that they're all atheists, who don't believe in God, but we know that like up to 60-70% of them do believe in God. And then the ones who don't are sort of like, they're more agnostic, sort of like, it's not that I don't believe in God, it's just that I'm not sure.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that's very different than the picture from the other side.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much there that's interesting to me, because part of what I'm hearing is that there's a lack of religious literacy in the wider culture. And then part of how religion is misused, and people are sort of forced to conform to certain structures and ways of being that don't match who they are created to be, and who they are authentically, like we were talking about before. So they don't have the freedom, and so then it kind of forces them out of it. And yet I feel a bit compelled, like I want to push back here if I can. And I just want to challenge you, because I know like you have a story of coming back to the Catholic Church after you left. And so you're saying that this was unlikely for people to do, but yet you did it.
See, that's right. But at every event that I do, Julia, someone's like, "But you did right, but you," and I'm like,
Right.
"I'm a 5'10" Capricorn with 18 tattoos. I'm not like everybody else. I'm a godparent to my friend Laurel, who is an adult convert who also grew up in the Bay Area and has purple hair, and like, is very Berkeley. But that she was like me, just she was Catholic attracted, she was
Mm-hmm.
attracted to that. She went to a Catholic high school. She wasn't grew up Catholic, but she had been exposed to good things like about the church,
Mm-hmm.
social justice. And she lives in the neighborhood of this very activist Black Catholic church in Oakland. And so she saw that side of the church. And I saw a side that was very, I went to a Paulist parish, or a Jesuit parish. I saw churches that were very open. I had a very unusual experience. And you know what? The other unusual part of my experience is that when I was attracted to the church, nobody was like, "You should come to Bible study. You should, read this. You should do
Right.
this. You should do it." They just were like, "You can come if you want to."
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like this bombardment of,
Mm-hmm.
how when you go to a new church for the first time, Timothy Egan, in his book on pilgrimage, he writes about traveling around Europe on pilgrimage, and he walks into this church in England, and he says he feels like a blood donor at a vampire convention. Like, they're all just like, new person, right? Like, here's a name tag.
Except when I go to a Catholic church, like when I'm just like traveling and I pop, like no one will, like there's no hospitality sometimes.
Yeah, they don't even realize you're there.
Like,
okay,
I sometimes think like no one interacted. Like, did I just like enter like an thing and I turn invisible and it's all like,
yeah. So, but as soon as you start asking questions, then it's like you trigger the so like it was both very welcoming and not a forced conversion thing. It was just this really sweet, wonderful older priest who died a few years ago, who would just, say like, and he just sat down with me, and I told him my whole spiel, and he was like, what you're going to bring with you from your life into the church is a gift. So don't change. I mean, you will change, but like, don't change who you are, because that's not what it's about. And I went and saw him again, and I said, I'm a writer and I'm a journalist, and like, I don't fit in with Catholic Church. It's just this, it was during the whole debate over who could take communion, which is exactly what we're seeing with politicians, like who can take communion, right? And it's exactly, here we are again. And I just found that so off-putting. And I said, I want to find other Catholics who wrestle with these questions. And he took this piece of paper and he wrote down National Catholic Reporter, Commonweal, America Magazine, and I write for all of those places now.
There you go.
So I was indoctrinated. So yeah, but
and
it just
part of the church too. I also hear some things about the importance of just being warm and welcoming, but not putting pressure on people, accepting people for who they are, meeting them for where they are, and you can invite them to stuff, but like, don't expect them to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Nuns and Nuns has been so successful, which I think have you done an episode on that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, Stina came on and talked about her book.
So Nuns and Nuns, this, bringing together women religious and nuns, or I would say seekers more than, there are more people who are curious about. And that's been very fruitful in a lot of cities now. And they even had an experiment here where people lived in a convent for 6 months with the Sisters of Mercy down in the South Bay. And I think that's successful because it isn't, the sisters who are involved in it, as you know, are always like, we're not here to, to proselytize, we're modeling, and we want to pass our charism on to somebody. And so if it ends up being these people who aren't necessarily Catholic, at least they're going to walk away from this understanding the values that we espouse and understanding why we live the way we do.
Yeah, right. I mean, we just want to share our life. It's a joy to share our life. And yet there is this thing in me that I will admit where it kind of feels like when you make a really beautiful meal and you're ready to feed it to your friends, and then you find out like, oh, they have a food allergy. They can't eat it. And it's like, oh, what I get here, what I'm tasting is so good, and I want to share this with you. And there's something that's blocking it from us being in full communion, right? And so that's always feels like a little bit of a disappointment for me, because I just want to share the goodness.
I absolutely agree with you on that sensation. I often feel, and I don't talk about this or write about this much, but the loneliness of my decision to become Catholic and how isolating that's been in many ways, just in the sense that I don't have a lot of friends who are Catholic. I mean, I have lots of friends like you who are Catholic, but here in Oakland, one person.
Right.
So who do I go to church with? Who do I talk to about this stuff? My prayer group kind of fell apart during COVID. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that that monthly, sitting down with other Catholics and talking about stuff thing. And it is extreme, and people don't take me seriously as an academic sometimes,
Mm.
because they feel that anybody who believes in God is sort of silly, or there's an anti-religious thing in the Bay Area. I don't want to bash the place that I live because it's a wonderful place, but it is very profoundly weird to be Catholic, to be Catholic in the most secular part of America. What does that mean?
Yeah.
It means that the other Catholics are not white, right?
Yeah.
They are not people who look like me. They're not people who have my job. They're not
Mm-hmm.
people. They are Latinx, Asian, African American, and so that's okay. But it is definitely something where I have to be aware of my whiteness when I move into their spaces, because it's their church, when
Right.
I show up. So
Yeah.
it's an awkward, and it is isolating sometimes.
Mm.
I joked when Radical Reinvention came out that the whole book was like a Craigslist ad back then, or like a Match.com, or like, what is it now? Like, I don't want to even go on those apps, so I don't know, but like, of like, I want to find friends.
Yeah.
And I did.
Well, it
I
worked.
did. I
I'm
found
your friend
lots. Yes, I found you and our friend Jessica Messman, who's
now. Right.
also wrestles with these questions, and
Yeah.
all the people I work with in America and Commonwealth, but nobody lives here, Julia.
Yeah.
It's really lonely. So
Mm.
y'all need to move to the Bay Area. The weather's perfect. It's 75 degrees today.
You don't need to keep doing
Beautiful.
the Craig's place. This is like the ad.
Yeah.
Stage two. Now move here. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh
So
shit.
that's the part that I find it is difficult. And I was
Yeah.
I was tweeting about it the other day, and then I deleted all the tweets because I'm like, I just sound like I'm feeling sorry for myself.
Mm.
It's been this wonderful gift, but it's also just, it is very isolating sometimes because people don't know what to say in
Mm.
response to it. If you're Catholic, it's sort of like this weird, it's just, if you're queer and you go to Burning Man, and you like you live in a co-housing here, it's great, normal. But if you're Catholic, it's weird. So in some
Yeah.
ways that's kind of cool, right?
Right. It's actually radical. How about it? You're a real anti-conformist. Uh, so yeah, in the midst of all this, the package of Kaya Oaks doing the things in the world and authentically showing up as you are to all these spaces, spiritual direction, teaching, writing, being a Catholic person, and being lonely with that in the Bay Area. What is discipleship for you?
That's a question I've been thinking a lot about during the pandemic, because it's funny, and I do talk about this in spiritual direction a lot. I have a much easier time talking and thinking about my relationship with God than I do with Jesus. And that's again because I live here, where in Jesus has been in a part of the world where Jesus has really been hijacked by the religious right, and that people are suspicious of Jesus because they associate him with evangelicals. And so to be a disciple of Jesus is hard for me to even, I'm totally like, you want to talk about mystical experiences and finding God in all things and art, and I'm like, yeah, I could go on all day. But when somebody says to me, who is Jesus to you, what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus, I'm at a loss for words.
Mm.
But I was thinking about this recently because of the Trump era, thankfully, hopefully receding into the rearview mirror. And how did I survive the last 4 years as a person of faith in a country where religion was weaponized and used for all the wrong reasons to do harm? And I kept coming back to the Jesus who talks about, is it Matthew 6:6, like, go into your room and pray in secret, and that's where your Father who's in secret will reward you. And I was like, that's the discipleship that that is the sustaining faith, the personal, private relationship with Jesus. And that Jesus who meets us in our solitude, in our loneliness. I really love the singer-songwriter Nick Cave, and who I think is very God-haunted. And he has a newsletter where he writes to his fans about music, and his son died. It was very tragic a few years ago. And it has led him to this ongoing conversation with fans about death and the afterlife. And he grew up Anglican in Australia, and he talks about this Jesus inside of us, like this suffering entombed Christ who lives inside of us, and how it's, for him, that's more symbolic. And so as an artist, he's trying to open that up. But I think that's a really interesting idea. Who's like that private, hidden Jesus that we don't share with everybody, that we don't beat people over the head with, that we don't use to hurt people or punish them or call them out for being different in their sexuality or their gender or their race. Like, who is that Jesus that we carry inside of us? That sort of, that Sacred Heart image is really, that's an interesting one to sit with, rather than like the public facing Jesus who's standing there preaching and telling, that Jesus who's like, go into your room and shut the door. Oh yeah, right. Like that's so that's what discipleship means to me sometimes, is to be willing to just say, this is very, very personal and very important to me, and it's very vulnerable for me to talk about it. And it's surprising to hear myself say that because I write about it, but it is actually that sometimes discipleship is a place of vulnerability. And that's something we should be more comfortable with, rather than feeling that we have to be confident about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. So it's going into the room, shutting the door, being with Christ in our hearts, and probably when we're doing that, recognizing that we're vulnerable and letting
Absolutely.
Christ sort of just minister to that broken place in us. Yeah. Oh, so Kaya, last question. What is messy about all this for you?
Well, everything. So messiness is actually a big theme of the book that I just finished, because it's about how women are expected to be, feminine, and we're expected to have lots of babies, and we're expected to take care of everybody, and we're expected to be sweet and kind and never get angry, and how we are not like that. And so that we actually are much messier and more interesting than that. And that's what messiness is to me. It's being interesting because it's refusing to fit into expectations. And that's what I loved writing about saints and like women throughout history, writers, politicians, whatever, who really refuse to conform to those ideas. And there's so many wonderful Catholic women religious who are like that. I mean, thank God, for sisters and nuns, because that messy model of like, I'm not going to do what you expect me to do. I'm going to, like, Mary Ward is one of my favorites. And she was, somebody who, she wanted to start a female version of the Jesuits, and the church wouldn't let her. And so she said, I'm going to do it anyway. And that messiness of like, this is the right idea. I have a good idea. So it is that kind of willingness to go outside of the prescribed boundaries of whatever it is that people expect you to be, and to be willing to get into, and that often means going outside of your comfort zone and meeting people who you wouldn't expect to meet, and like you and me, like, who would think that we would end up being friends, right? You wouldn't necessarily, on paper it doesn't make sense, but we, but like, we like each other a lot. And so that is the kind of messy, unexpected relationship that if we had stayed in our little bubbles, we would never have found.
Yeah. Going outside the bubbles, opening
Yes.
ourselves up to whatever's on the outside.
Right.
It's going to be messy, but it might be good too. Oh, thank you, Kaya. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
You're so welcome, and I enjoyed myself as well.
I invite you to join me in this contemplative moment. Kaya and I discussed what it means to have a prophetic voice and to speak the truth, even if we're naming truths that others don't want to hear. In his 2014 apostolic letter to all consecrated people, Pope Francis wrote about what it means to be a prophet. He wrote, "Prophets know God, and they know the men and women who are their brothers and sisters. They are able to discern and denounce the evil of sin and injustice. Because they are free, they are beholden to no one but God, and they have no interest other than God. Prophets tend to be on the side of the poor and the powerless, for they know that God Himself is on their side." Kaya referenced the prophet Jeremiah's agony about being called to speak the truth. I'd like to read that scripture for you now. If you can, I invite you to close your eyes and breathe deeply as you listen and pray. Notice if certain words or phrases are seeming important to you at this time. Notice if there's a particular message that God wants you to hear. A reading from Jeremiah, chapter 20, verses 7 through 13. You seduced me, Lord, and I let myself be seduced. You were too strong for me, and you prevailed. All day long I am an object of laughter. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I must cry out. Violence and outrage I proclaim. The word of the Lord has brought me reproach and derision all day long. I say I will not mention him. I will no longer speak in his name. But then it is as if fire is burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. I grow weary holding back. I cannot. Yes, I hear the whisperings of many. Terror on every side. Denounce, let us denounce him. All those who were my friends are on the watch for any mishap of mine. Perhaps he can be tricked, and then we will prevail and take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me, like a mighty champion. My persecutors will stumble. They will not prevail. In their failure, they will be put to utter shame, to lasting, unforgettable confusion. Lord of hosts, you test the just. You see mind and heart. Let me see the vengeance you take on them, for to you I have entrusted my cause. Sing to the Lord, praise the Lord, for he has rescued the life of the poor from the power of the evildoers. That's it for this episode of Messy Jesus Business. Thanks for listening. Messy Jesus Business is produced and hosted by me, Sister Julia Walsh, and edited by Cherish Bedzinski. You can find us online at messyjesusbusiness.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. If you like what you heard, please be sure to mention our podcast to your friends and followers. And we'd love to have your support via Patreon. From the bottom of our hearts and the middle of the mess, thank you. Messy Jesus Business is produced in partnership with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. You can learn more about our religious community and donate to our mission at www.fspa.org. I'm Sister Julia Walsh, and I'll catch up with you next time. Until then, peace, and all good.